And where, my pet, is Miss Jessel? Where is she, Flora? Where is she? You know you can see her. Look, Flora, look. There. You know you can see her. I can't. Admit it. She's there. You know you can see her. I can't. But look, she's there. She's there. That's right. Stop it. But you can see her. You must.
She's dead and buried.
I don't see anything. I've never seen anything. You're cruel, you're wicked. I hate you.
We lay, my love and I, beneath the weeping willow, but now alone I lie and weep beside the tree, singing, oh, willow, waily, by the tree that weeps with me, singing, oh, willow, waily, till my lover returns to me. We lay, my love and I, beneath the weeping willow, a broken heart ever. Oh, willow, I die. Oh, willow, I We lay, my love and I, beneath the weeping willow, but now alone I lie and weep beside the tree, singing, oh, willow, waily, by the tree that weeps with me, singing, oh, willow, waily, till my lover returns to me. We lay, my love and I, beneath the weeping willow, but now alone I lie. Oh, willow, I die. Oh, willow, I die.
Hello, welcome to the Literary License Podcast. Today we're talking about Turn of the Screw by Henry James and the classic Jack Clayton film, The Innocents, starring Deborah Kerr and Pamela Franklin. And today, my name is Keith Shago, and we have with us
John Wilson, hello.
and our marketing manager, Vicki Ray. Say hello, Vicki.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
And today what we're going to do is to start out our conversation, we're going to talk about our childhood scary experience. So, Vicki, what can you tell us about your earliest childhood scary experience?
Oh, man. Were we just talking about that?
Yeah, but definitely share because it's a great one. So,
Well, I wasn't sure who I'm going to offend. Now, I would have to say childhood scary things, because I've had a lot of scary things. I'm a paranormal investigator, too. But I would have to say when I was 12, I was a young Catholic schoolgirl, and I would have to go take guitar lessons at an old convent with all the statuary and the footpaths and all the stuff out back, much the same as this movie, actually. that has all the statuary, the circular pattern that you see in The Innocents. And that kind of struck me as that. I think that's probably why it reminded me of that. But I would have to go into this old catacomb kind of convent that was older than the hills at the time, and that had all the old statues in it, and twists and turns and stairs and everything else. And it was really quiet, but it was kind of like deathly quiet, like ghostly quiet. I swear the place had to be haunted. It had to be, because the place with that kind of history, with all them nuns walking around doing vespers or whatnot, I mean, I used to have to leave there when it was dark, and I just grab my instrument and just run right out as soon as I could, get in my father's car, because it was so creepy. But yeah, I would say that was the creepiest stuff going on, because I lived I did that idyllic childhood, but it was pretty normal, except for the nuns. The nuns were not normal, and I think they were most female schoolgirls, or little girls, or probably not so much the boys, but the girls definitely.
And what about yourself, John? What's your earliest childhood scary experience?
It's funny because I have a really good friend of mine I'm still actually really close with, that as growing up, like I've sort of always been attuned to the supernatural, like feeling wise. I've always felt things in rooms, and when I was younger, I couldn't figure it out or explain it. But I remember I went to grade school with a friend of mine, and I remember coming over to his place, and he would always say there's just something in my house, and it would just freak me out, because as a kid, especially if you had like sleepovers or you had like things, if you didn't know what those feelings would do to you, like you had this weird sort of ominous feeling that just lingered with you. But I definitely remember just like one time, like waking up in the middle of the night and feeling like something watching me. But then again, I always say there's an acquaintance of something that's really bad feeling versus like something that's safe, and that was like a safe situation. But that was probably when I was like, I want to say it was like 11 or 12 was like the first experience. So yeah, that was mine.
I think my earliest childhood scary experience, I grew up in a house on Route 3, on the corner of Route 3 and Jericho Road. And the house was built in 1798. And through the course of the time, about 13 or 14 people committed suicide in that house. And they would write their names and the dates of their death on the wall above the thing. And underneath the house, there was also a cistern, and there was also a cave, because it was used for the Underground Railroad at the time to smuggle freed slaves into Canada. But, I mean, the house is very unsettling. I mean, the house still stands. It's now owned by Nicky Pier in upstate New York, and it's been remodeled and stuff. But when we lived there, there's always like an odd sense of the house. I always felt uneasy. But I'm not quite sure if I felt uneasy because we had a teacher in Sackett's Harbor, where I went to school, that made us do a background history of all our houses, because it's a colonial looking place where I grew up. The only thing that ever happened there was the War of 1812, and nothing's happened there since. And and so because of the old houses, everyone had to do like this background history on their house. And I think that once I did the history of the house, I think that might have had the reason why I felt the house was quite scary and quite unsettling.
Did you feel it before, though? Did you feel that before that, or no? Or did it just feel like odd, and then that just amplified it?
I think that just kind of amplified it, really. I mean, when we moved into the house, the house was full of all this old stuff in the attic and old records and stuff like this. And these names are, as I said before, written above. And you go to the kitchen, and the kitchen to the right, there's this other room, and underneath that was like the cave that was underneath the house. But then above that, in the second story with these rafters, were the names and the dates of births. And I think that, your mind kind of tend to wonder what their names and what their date of births mean. And I think that once, we did the history of the house, I think that probably added to it as well. Yeah. Probably, my love of horror probably didn't help matters much either. And I was quite,
that's like a tombstone, though. If you think about it, it's like a large tombstone of all the names. It's creepy. Ugh.
Yeah, and I also think that I was quite a morbid little child anyway. So I mean, probably
were we all?
Hard to believe that.
You? Oh my God, really?
I just remember like coming home after seeing Amityville Horror, because I was really into the Amityville Horror at the time, and coming home and there's nobody there, and sitting in the house alone, freaked out, calling my everyone I knew so someone came home. But
little did you know you had your own Amityville Horror.
But I'd never actually seen anything. I just felt like there's always something there, and my two sisters also felt a bit uncomfortable there as well. So it was quite interesting how everyone felt about the place. But I would say that was probably my earliest childhood scary experience. Now,
There's a lot of houses like that, though.
Yeah.
That had a lot of weird history because of that. There was some on New York Ave, too, in Watertown.
It's interesting because, whenever especially instances happen, and especially a number of incidents happen, I just believe there is a sort of dispelment of energy that just resides in residue of that space. And so whether you choose to believe it is an actual entity or if it's a energy imprint that's on that space, it just kind of lingers and you can't get rid of it,
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So that brings us to the forming the plot segment of our episode. And what we do about forming the plot is basically we discuss why we're covering this film. Now, this film was my suggestion, was The Innocents. And the reason why I decided to cover The Innocents and bring everybody in on this is a film that I really, really always enjoyed and always felt quite unsettled. And I like the ambiguity ambiguousness of the I'll stick that word out there. And I think it's also because you can look at the film from two sides itself. You can either look at it as which we'll get in further when we start discussing the book and later the film, is that you can either look at it as the governess is either mad or she's actually seeing something. And I always quite like that. And every time I see the film, I always would play around with looking at these two sides. And also, I've always wanted to read The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which is based from, and I never actually got around to it. It's one of those things I've always put off. And I thought, well, let's cover The Innocents, and that way I'll have a reason to read Turn of the Screw, and voila, that is why we're here. So, which also now brings us into the prologue segment of it, where John Wilson will give us a synopsis of the book.
Okay, so a very young woman's first job, governess for two weirdly beautiful, strangely distant, oddly silent children, Miles and Flora, at a forlorn estate, an estate haunted by a beckoning evil. Half-seen figures who glare from dark towers and dusty windows, silent, foul phantoms who, day by day, night by night, come closer, even closer. With growing horror, the helpless governess realizes the fiendish creatures want the children, seeking to corrupt their bodies, possess their minds, own their souls. But worse, more worse, the governess discovers that Miles and Flora have no terror of the lurking evil, for they want the walking dead as badly as the dead wanted them.
So, Vicky, on the page-to-page segment of our segment of the episode. Sorry, my brain's still trying to wake up. How did you feel about the book, Vicky?
Well, the first chapter, I found that he draws you in, but in order for him to, James to draw you in, you have to kind of understand the first chapter where they're sitting around telling ghost stories. And I believe it's Douglas who was telling the ghost stories. And I believe he was in love with the governess, governess, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And when he was a young man, I believe it was she was his sister's governess. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was kind of a hard read in the beginning. But once you started getting into it, it kind of started making sense. But you really had to pay attention to it, and sometimes you had to actually go back to understand because it was Victorian, and they wrote differently.
Correct.
Back then, and so I don't know if it translates well into our century near as much as it did theirs, but it was an interesting read, no doubt. I've never read it before. I'd seen the movie years ago when I was a young girl, and it scared the heck out of me. I remember that, but I found it very interesting, and I was kind of glad to read that because it kind of, when you read something like that you haven't read in a long time. You find that you want to read other things similar to that because it kind of reopens that window for you that you kind of shut in college, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the story was published in 1898, and it was a novella, as we know, written by Henry James. And
Right.
it was, each chapter would come out on a weekly basis on a magazine here in London called the Collier's Weekly Magazine. And it ran from 27th of January to about 16th of April. And I think the reason why the story starts out is that during the Victorian era, around Christmas time, families would sit around on Christmas Day and they would tell each other ghost stories. And they would have their friends and family around. And I think that's where the opening chapters is probably the reason why it is. Because at that time, that was a big thing for people to do. You get your family and friends around at Christmas, and everyone would tell ghost stories. It's the way this story starts. And then as you know, by chapter 2, you're kind of fully into it.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing I found that I thought it was going to be a wraparound story. I thought that basically you'd have your first chapter, you get introduced to these characters, then you go into the main story about the governess and the 2 children, and then by the end of it, you come back out of it, and you have the circle of the people, being told the ghost story, but it doesn't do that.
Yeah,
it's kind of
It's funny you say that, because I had a difficult time reading it. I'm not a huge fan of that sort of era of writing, just because there's a lot of acquiescing, because you start out with someone telling a story to people about a story.
Right.
Get into, I'm assuming you get into the letter, because he's mentioning a letter that he needs, or he needs to get that letter in order to then tell the story. So then when you start it, then the letter is actually a governess telling her story. Before she can start her story about the story, she talks about why she's a governess. So there's a lot of that happens.
Exactly.
Before I can tell you what's going to happen, let me tell you a little bit about this, and then we'll get into it. So you have to be really patient to be able to get through a type of story like this, because it is very lyrical and very poetic in a lot of ways of the descriptions that are being used. But it's definitely, you have to have patience to be able to kind of sit through it. And I agree. I thought it was going to come back to Douglas saying, well, then with bated breath, what happened to her? what was, and you never got that. It just ended very weird and short and cut. And I kind of turned the page and I was, oh, okay.
Where's the rest of the story?
I guess that's it. I guess that's all we're going to get.
I mean, I think that, the way the story is set out and stuff, at that time, there was 2 very popular books at the time, in which, I mean, this story really relates to. There's the mystery of Adolfo, which was a ghost story about a governess. And then, of course, indirectly, you have the Jane Eyre story going on.
Right.
Sort of thing. So governesses and this whole gothic fiction. I think where Henry James took it was the gothic fiction mixed with a ghost story. So I think, and it had, I mean, the story and the way it's written has all the trappings of a classic gothic story. The big manor house, the shadows, the governess who's haunted by some evil that's happened in the past within the household, sort of thing. I mean, I found that the characters, the governess doesn't have a name, first of all, in the book at all. She's
correct.
Just she. And in the book, she's like a 20-year-old parson's daughter who has like no experience with children.
Experience with anything, for that matter.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. And she gets, it's kind of dumped in here. And the only thing I wondered whilst reading it the whole time was, because you find other fathers of parsons and whatever like that. It's like, was he one of these, brim and brimstone kind of preachers that said that everything's evil? And if that was her upbringing and that would pertain to the story, or was she just mad? I mean,
can go either way.
But you can also say, like, to your, being crazy and seeing things is one thing, but it's also, was her senses heightened? I didn't, in the beginning, I didn't feel like the story was a story about a haunting. It was more of a story of her trying to figure out what happened and why Miles got expelled from his school, and wanting to know why these perfect little angelic kids would lie, because then it became then I think things started to happen after that. So like you said, is it her psychosis of these perfect things, these perfect little angels of what she saw and what they are, and then, but how could they lie? Oh, they must be evil. Like, how would they, why would they do that to me? Why would they lie? I want to just protect them, and I just thought that was very interesting that that's when things started to actually manifest, when she saw that there was something corrupted about these little perfect angel children,
Back then, though, when like with the Bronte sisters and all that, that was the rise of spiritualism, when everything was getting really kind of crazy, with all that seances and ghosts and when you have Wuthering Heights and things like that coming out.
And the Ouija board was, a thing. It was a parlor game that people would play with, when they're on cold, lonely evenings. Get your friends together.
Well, apparently you tell horror stories during Christmas. I never knew that. So, you're anyone who died in this place? Merry Christmas. I thought one of my favorite characters was the actual the maid, because she just was she knew stuff was going on, but she kind of just didn't really affirm it, right? So she never really chose her side. She never chose the kid's side. She just wanted to do what's right. And it never really, to me, that's what added to the weight of, it's one thing that the kids didn't see it because maybe their young minds couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. But this woman who has been with these kids and the family in general for many years knows the history of that place. But is she just being where she doesn't want to accept what is going on there, or is it that she just really doesn't see what's going on there? And Henry James does a great job in alluding to, she gives these little nuggets of like, well, let's just not talk about that, or let's just like she just doesn't want it. She sweeps it away, and for a reader, it frustrates you. But then it's like, okay, what is going on? Come on,
You really are kind of left in a lurch one way or the other. Is this going on? Is this not going on? Is she insane? But the Mrs. Gross, though, I believe she just wanted to get her job done and probably get the hell out of Dodge at the end of the day. Just not anything.
True.
I also think the story, when it was written, also has to do with the British class system as well, I think also is like, you'd have the uncle who's, who's basically a playboy. And so he'd be the, rich aristocracy kind of class person. And then you have the housekeeper, and she would be, the working class or the lower classes. And they were quite no nonsense. They just got on with it. And then I think that your governess would lie somewhere in the middle because she's a parson's daughter. So she's not rich, but she's not poor. She's probably more like the middle class sort of situation.
And she's educated, because there's a time when she gets a letter and she's like, here, read it to the nanny. And the nanny's like, oh, miss, I can't read. And she's like, oh, so foolish of me. Sorry,
And I think that, and at that time, they do allude that she's attractive, but there must be a huge question at that time. Here she is in her 20s and she's not married. There's no suitor in her life.
It's spinster status, maybe.
Yeah, and if she's working as a governess, that means, she is pretty much a spinster for that time period. And, and I think with the housekeeper, as you said, Mrs. Gross, she'd just be no nonsense. She's just like, just get on your job, just get on doing. And another thing is that I think the governess had a lot of spare time on her hands where she just was overthink situations.
Clearly.
The housekeeper's busy all the time. She's, idle hands.
She's tending to everything where she's, taking care of now. And it's also another body, right? You're like, oh, here's the governess, but I got to take care of her too,
Right.
And I do think that, I found what's interesting about the book. The book is based on a true story. And basically the true story, it was about an incident that happened in Hinton Ampter in 1771. A woman named Mary Ricketts moved into her home, and after seeing an apparition of a male and a woman in her house, she took her children, and she would see these couples days and nights, and they would come creeping through the windows and bending over beds, and it made her feel like she was in danger, her and her children in danger, so they moved out of the house, and she would tell this story, and it became like a newspaper story in England. in 1771.
Interesting.
So Henry James kind of took the story and kind of ran with it a little bit. I don't know if Mary Ricketts had money and she lived in a manor house. She probably lived in a small little farmhouse somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Probably had 2 rooms or something. But the day, I think all the Victorian writers at that time used to always set their houses in great big manor houses.
It's funny because this also reminded me of a short story that I read called "The Yellow Wallpaper," and it's sort of, if you take out the children, it's about a man who brings his wife to this house to like give her rest, but she just is slowly descending into madness. But you don't really know if it's her descending into madness or if there's just something really wrong with the house, and it's almost like it's playing with her depression because she's very depressed. If I recall, it's like, I don't know if it's that she tried to have a child and she couldn't, and it just like, maybe it's postpartum depression, but it just reminded me of that story, and it was around that same time. So it was published in 1892. So so I just think of that what haunts you sometimes is also your own personal thing. So we don't really know much about the governess, right? We really don't know much about her background. She just gets kind of thrown into this world where she's trying to protect these kids, but you wonder what, who she is, because you kind of wonder if it is something that's real or not, or is it going in through her mind,
But going back into Keith's Fire and Brimstone with the vicarage, I mean, when you think about how she's treating these children, whether she's insane or not, she's kind of going really off the deep end with the Fire and Brimstone, kind of, because evil, you probably these 2 angelic children, and she's, just evil abounds. Whereas when she first sees them, you got this beautiful flora, this, beautiful flower in a garden, and then you got Miles, who's kind of like the little soldier, kind of, so to speak, and she just inherently goes through this where she's finding these children to be evil and she has to save them, But the little boy, he eventually saying, you devil, is he calling him the devil? Is he calling her the devil,
True. There's also, if you think about it, if you relate this to modern times, if you took the story and brought it to modern times, and you have 2 spoiled rich kids, right?
Right.
That don't have parents, their parents are gone, and you have an uncle who doesn't give a shit about them, like, just doesn't care. And I think I also want to believe that their inheritance is he's a keeper of their inheritance. So he's just spending it, doing whatever he wants. Like, leave me alone. I don't want to know anything about them. It pretty much like if they died, he'd be like, I don't want to hear about it. I just, don't disturb me. But again, how that has an impact on a young child's mind.
Exactly.
And I want to assume that the brother's a little bit older than the sister, right? So
I think they're like 10 and 8.
Yeah, so he's definitely more aware of it because he's deliberately doing stuff to act out in order to see if anyone will stop him, right? Because he does stuff where he's like, when she says, "Oh, I'm going to reach out to your uncle, will you?" Like he's challenging her, like, "Oh, are you? Are you going to do that? Come on, let's see if you do that." So I think if you bring it into a modern time, there's a lot of spoiled rich kids in our world that do the same things to act out in order to get attention.
Exactly.
And I also think that if the governess was a bit more worldly, she probably would have had more cause, because at that time also psychoanalysis and psychiatry was actually growing at that time, which, being a parson's daughter, it'd be more the religion basis, the psychology behind everything. And I do think that, if she had a bit of a psychological background to the children, she probably would realize that maybe the kids are acting out. I mean, first of all, it's like, they're in an unloved situation. They've been thrown into a situation where they have no more parents. They got an uncle who doesn't care about them. And they don't play with other children. All they have is the 2 of them. All they have is the brother and sister. They're together as a unit, but there's no outside children influences.
Correct.
So, and I think that, if it happened today, and let's say that, Miles gets sent off to boarding school and then he gets kicked out of school and he comes back home, you would look at it for a simple thing. Was he acting out because of not feeling loved? We find out later that he finds, the body of Quint. He finds, so he would have been, there'd been some traumatization of that. you know, they were really close to, I mean, Miss Jessel, the former governess, and then you have Quint. They were like a mother and father figure for them, and they both died for whatever reason.
But there was also the governess kind of paints that relationship as a very dysfunctional, and at one point alludes to the fact that maybe they had witnessed him having sex, in front of them. So, it's not like the picturesque, perfect, ideal love story of parents. So if that's all you've sort of been around, you're going to always wonder how does it feel to be loved, right? Because if this is a version that I see of what love is love a little bit of pain, is love a little bit of turmoil,
It's kind of a claustrophobic story, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then it alludes to the taboo of sexuality in Victorian society, throughout the book as well. Not only claustrophobic, but taboo throughout the whole book.
Well, another thing is I mean, if you look at it from her point of view, the governess, let's say that she has a large religious background, which we're assuming because of her, who her father is. I mean, Bly, where the house is, I mean, that's probably like Adam and Eve, and she probably looks at Miles and Flora as Adam and Eve, and Bly is Garden of Eden, and that Jessel and Quint were like the snake. They're there to tempt the child, the Flora like the apple, and you have all that pouring through. I mean, which is very Victorian anyway. I mean, church was very much what you did. Everyone went to church. So I think you have those things playing through it, and the thing about the book, it's everything that's not being said. It's not so much of what's being said as what's not being said.
Exactly.
Yeah, true. Exactly. I mean, and it's a lot of assuming, right? So the other part where I say she acquiesces is that it's before she can approach anyone, she goes into her mind and says, how do I work this out? How do I work that I'm going to manipulate the person to have them tell me what I want to hear? And she's doing the maid, she's doing with the kids, she's doing with anyone she comes across because she just doesn't trust them. She just kind of goes into this, okay, before I approach them, how do I manipulate them? How do I get them to tell me what they want them to tell me?
I mean, she actually, in the story though, when she takes the job, she was basically romanced into it, like how he takes her hand, and she was kind of, all aflutter, when this gentleman, approached her, and everything is under her censorship or under her complete power. He gives her full license to this manor or whatever, this big 27-room house they live in. And I mean, maybe it had gone to her head, I'm going to do this, this, and this because I will win this gentleman over if I triumph over the household, basically. So she probably had that in her mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do find it weird that after the ending, spoiler alert, Miles dies at the end. She sends Flora back to live with her uncle. I mean, they got off to London. She stays home with Miles and pretty much, traumatizes him to death. But then if you look at the beginning of the story and you're thinking, well, obviously she worked again as a governess.
She's pretty screwed.
So it's like, God, what were her references like?
So the last one didn't end so well, but at least one of them came out on the end.
No kidding.
I mean, the thing is, she's in her 20s, so, I mean, and he said that when the story takes place, when Douglas tells the story, we're not quite sure how old he is, but we know that she's been dead for 20 years. So, so it'd be quite interesting in the governess itself. I mean, I guess she probably lived to be about 50 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we can assume. Well, she didn't live a long life, sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, if you said she's in her 20s or 40s, that's even less,
Yeah.
That's fairly old even for back then.
But we don't know how long it took her to get another job afterwards. So.
Yeah.
I know.
Before she taught Douglas's sister.
Though I'm sure she would have got a good referral from the uncle because he took care of at least one of the kids that he didn't want. So
this is true.
Was it a bad thing for him? I don't
Probably
know.
not.
a little bit closer to the inheritance becoming his, so let's just, theorize that part.
Theoretically, that works. Because apparently she did have another job, right?
Yeah, well, that's what he's saying, that, she was the governess of his sister.
Douglas. Yeah.
And that's how he knew her, and they became quite close.
Again.
To hit on something a bit controversial, I mean, it also hints
she has
around
a pattern.
It also hints around that she might be a bit of a pedophile.
Exactly.
True.
It is totally a pedophilism, completely.
Yeah. I mean, the movie, I think, plays around with it more, but I think it's because the film is a lot more visual than the book.
Which is quite shocking for back then, I might add.
Yeah, which we'll get to after the commercial, talk more fuller about the film itself. But I think that, but I mean, it does hint around at all this sort of stuff. And,
exactly.
The governess is starved for affection. I think she looks for affection wherever it's coming from. I'm sure that, if a squirrel ran up her leg, she'd be all sexualized by that.
There's a squirrel on my leg too.
It's evil, but it feels so good.
They're like, what squirrel? What do you mean? You call it a squirrel.
But then again, it hits again around back in the day. It was totally sexual repression back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, the thing is, I imagine she probably, I'm assuming that she would be a virgin. It doesn't seem.
Squirrel.
And the way, I mean, if you look at the uncle is very smarmy. I mean, he's very smarmy, and he's very blunt about what he is. And basically, he's a playboy, and he basically fucks around a lot.
Yeah,
pretty much what he does. And but she still falls for it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, for someone who's such a pious background, you just think that she'd be repulsed by a man like that,
or desperate.
But so she's just.
But it's also, if you think about, if she is of faith and she is of this religious accord, that's also very alluring, because even she kind of it's taunted that way with Quentin, right? When he visits her, she's scared, but she's also very intrigued. What is this very handsome figure? It frightens her, but there's a part of her that's like, hey, can you come knocking on my door at night? come say hi to me in the middle of the night,
She wants a bit of rogue in the middle of the night.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you want with your wine? A bit of rogue.
Oh, it doesn't really suit you, does it? What's the Lily? Is it Lily? No, wait. What's the sister's name?
Flora.
Flora. He's like, oh, it didn't really suit Flora.
I mean, there are. I have to say, with the book, there are some wonderful passages in it, though. I mean, it's beautifully written.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think that, I write, as you know, if you follow our website or anything like that, I write a lot of book reviews, and I read a lot of books for different publishers and stuff and write reviews. And I'm so used to reading modern fiction that sometimes getting into something like this is a bit jarring, going back into it. It's like, whoa.
Sure.
But I have to say, by the time I got to the end of it, I kind of was into the pace of it and the flow of it. And overall, I enjoyed the book. I don't know if it's one of my favorites. But I think, I do, it was a bit like reading Wuthering Heights when I was going to school, and I found that a bit hard going, but I'm glad that I read it. It's one of those stories that, you bitch and complain whilst reading it, but when you're finished, it's like, you feel like you've accomplished something. So I think
I actually,
we're intelligent now.
I read it, I got through it, and then I actually did the audible book and it's narrated by Emma Thompson, which I have I respect this woman anyways, but I have a whole new respect for her, because she goes to this sort of Cockney accent with the maid. And then when she does the voice of Miles, I kept re-listening to it, because she just goes into this, oh, I don't know what's wrong. And she goes into this voice, and you're like, it's so creepy. So and I actually would listen to it and read along with her. And it gives so if you're not a big reader and you don't want to read it, do the audible. And if you can, just go for the ride, because it's so well done by her. So yeah, I thought it just gave a whole nother layer to the characters when I listened to it. Having someone read it to me and listening to it was like, oh, it definitely gave depth to the characters.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, and understanding, because there was times when I was like, what's going on? And when I heard her reading it, I actually understood some of the conversation she was having, because at one point, that's why I would have to reread stuff like, what is she asking her? What is she saying? But when you hear someone reading it, you're like, oh, okay, now I get what she's playing, where she's playing.
I think it's important to note that the Turn of the Screw, if you are Kindle and you're part of our sponsors, Amazon's Prime member, you can actually get Turn of the Screw for free on your Kindle. It's a free book as part of their classic section. So
that's a bargain.
It's a bargain. And you can also join the Amazon Audible, where you can actually get the audiobook on a fee. I think it's something like $6.99 or $7.99 a month?
It was it's right now it's actually free. There's a promotion for a free. I think it's for a month for free, and then you can. I think it's like $6.99 a month.
Right.
Yeah, and you get I think 2 audiobooks a month through Audible.
Nice.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And what about you, Vicky? What's your overall appreciation or disappreciation of the book?
Disappreciation. I don't know. I would have to say, what I appreciated about was I really enjoyed, like I told you earlier, going back into something that I hadn't read in a long time. Well, not that particular book. Like I used to read Bronte sisters, in college and whatnot, required reading back in the day. But, like you said, Wuthering Heights. Well, things like that I actually like to read. I loved Wuthering Heights. And I've reread it several times, actually. But I never had read The Turning of the Screw before. And like I said, the first chapter or two, it took me a while to figure out what was going on, actually, because I didn't understand, it was like the back and forth, the in and out, until I finally realized, okay, they're talking about ghost stories. I had forgotten my, the history where people actually used to tell ghost stories back in the day. And, we don't do that much anymore. I think it's, maybe something we should all do for our grandchildren or children. Tell ghost stories at Christmas. Why not spice up Christmas a little bit and be a little creative? But no, I actually enjoyed it. Like I said, I was really getting into it until the very end. And I think Keith said it was like he ran out of ink. Like, okay, what the hell?
Or paper, one of the two.
I know.
Darn it.
Like, what is going on? I'm going, that's why I texted him. I go, hey, I don't get the ending. What happened? He goes, he ran out of ink. Because I did, and then I started, thinking, well, maybe, the book at the end of the story, perhaps, maybe that was how it was supposed to end. Maybe she smothered Miles. Maybe he didn't die of fright. Maybe she just squeezed him to death. There were so many what ifs with this book. And I believe when they asked Deborah Kerr in the movie, not that we're going to get to that, but it's sort of like you have to make up your own mind. Were these things actually happening? Did these transpire? Was it all in her head? Was it a little bit of both? Or was she just plain batshit,
Yeah, true.
But I mean, it looks like between her being raised as a, Parsons' daughter and being 20 and being put in a position of power where she's never had any, and the book, I mean, James could have, he kind of left a lot of avenues open for you to make up your own mind, or at least come to some kind of logical conclusion in your own head, which I really still haven't yet. I kind of like both sides. Well, was she crazy? Was she not crazy? Mm-hmm. I mean, you could play it out both ways. So either way, it's a win-win.
I think the moral of the story that if you're going to leave your children behind, it might be best to check references.
She's 20. It's fine. She's young. She can take care of him for a long time. I'm seriously thinking that's why he picked her, because he's like, well, she's young. She can last like 40 years. So hey,
she's just lucky that they weren't shook like an English nanny.
Well, and for poor Laura, she was like, tell me.
Yeah, really, she drove that kid.
Ragdoll.
she got the fever.
Yeah.
I mean, I do kind of wonder. I mean, I do kind of wonder what the uncle made of. It's like, and the housekeeper. I mean, the housekeeper runs off in Florida. They go off to London because Flora's having a conniption fit or whatever, screaming and hollering and feeling ill all of a sudden. I mean, there's a lot of nervous breakdowns at this point, by the end of the book, and then it's like, just leave Miles with me. I'll take care of Miles. Miles will be a different person.
Yeah.
And then it's like, a letter. The letter probably arrived like the day after they arrived in London. Like, Miles is dead. Okay.
You take care of him, all right.
And then you get pictures like the Nicholas family like going through and like, hey, we got this new governess. Oh, she's about 25 years old. She's only lost one child. Let's hire her. Wow.
The odds are good. The odds are good. 1 for 2, you know.
I know, she either smothered him or scared the shit out of him. Either way.
A funny thing about thinking about it now, I mean, it just come to me, but, Nicholas, in the beginning of the story, saying that the same governess became her sister's governess, but he sounded like he might have had a bit of a fling with her.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of hinted around.
There's definitely an intimacy there, because he is protective of the story too, right? Like, I won't tell you what I will let you hear from her words, like what she said.
Well, he held on to the manuscript, did he not?
Yeah. And when he was asked about her, he said that, oh, we were very close.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, was she attractive? Oh, very attractive. And then and because of the whole Victorian thing, you read between the lines, like, oh God, they were doing the business.
Yeah, exactly.
They were bumping the uglies. How was he when they were doing that? It's just like,
I have to say I liked the movie more than the book. I'm just not a big fan of this style of writing, and it's just like, I appreciate it and I respect it. It's just, I have an issue with a lot of acquiescing, and I'm just like, wrap it up. Let's get to the point. What's going on? And it felt a lot of that, and I was getting frustrated, and especially it's a novella, so it's a short story. So other writers would tell you, like, you have to very quickly get to the point, so you go into it, and we'll talk about the comparison of the book and how they kind of do that in the very beginning of the movie. Mm-hmm. So I would say that it's not my favorite. I'm glad that I read it, because it does made me remember one of my favorites, which is The Yellow Wallpaper, and how they did that. But it's definitely something, like, I'm not sad that I read it. It's just something that would have not picked it up right away.
You're not going to revisit it anytime soon.
Yeah, and I won't be revisiting it anytime soon. Because at one point I was even reading a line to a friend of mine who is a fellow writer, and he's like, what the hell? What do you mean? What is that? And I'm like, again, like, this is written in, and I told him, he's like, okay, well, that makes sense. But yeah, he goes, I probably would not be reading that. I'm like, okay, so I'm not the only one,
Thinking about it, I think that the reason why, like, Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, all the Victorian, Henry James, Portrait of a Lady, and Turn of the Screw, I think maybe the reasons why they were read this way is because at that time, this is your main entertainment. It's either this or the theater. And so people would read books. And I think that, if when you came home from work and you're sitting by the fire, you either needle pointed or you read. I mean, I think that was pretty much it. So maybe the reason why it takes so long to get to the point, and the reason why they were written this way, and I'm only surmising here.
Makes a lot of sense.
I'm not a literary major in any sense of the word, but I think maybe the reason why they all have this thing in common is maybe you were expected to read a book and then sit back and let it flow around in your mind so you can make sense of it. Because, I mean, all this Victorian writing is pretty much like that. I mean, it's all about what's not being said, what's being said, how's it being said, what way is it being said, why is it being said, and it's all about that. Yeah. And I think maybe that's the reason why it's written in that. But I said before, I'm only guessing here. I mean, it's guessing.
I mean, I also think it also has to be that, again, during that time, things were a little bit more conservative, right? So you couldn't be, pardon my term, balls to the wall. You can't be balls to the wall back then. You had to kind of be very innuendo, because you didn't want churches and religious types coming and going, this is heathen, burn the books, like, you had to be a little bit, as an artist, you had to be a little bit more conservative. And I think as artists started to push the line, you were able to then add in more layers to your liberal-minded sort of view of that constructed supernatural world, you know.
But they did kind of incorporate a little of the insidious into it, you know.
True.
You know, you knew what they were talking about. I guess maybe, like I said, when it translates into our century, maybe it's because we're so much more jaded that we read into it what we're reading into it.
True.
But seriously, you know, as far as pedophilia, there was definitely that going on in this book. I don't care.
Yeah, but it wasn't blatantly said, and I think
It wasn't blatantly said at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think
now you just put it right out there. Now you just be like, come here, sit on my lap, son. You're like, what? You're like, now it's like really blatant.
But if you look at Victorian fiction at that time, and you look at, I mean, I think Henry James was probably for the upper class people, the educated. But then if you look at the common man Victorian writer, which was Charles Dickens, who actually gave birth to the modern fiction, and you see the way his stuff is written. And so maybe that's the reason why might be the reason why it's written this way, because this was for the higher up educated crowd, and then where the Charles Dickens was for the common man. That would be run in the newspaper, those segments.
Wait, so is that what happened to Miles? He became Tiny Tim? She just hobbled him and like threw here. Put him with this family. Go.
God bless us, everyone.
God bless everyone.
I'll be dead in a year, but I'm so happy to be alive now. Jolly ho. Hip hip hooray.
Look, it would teach him a really big lesson to like, don't screw with the governess. Got away with one, you're not getting away with the second one.
Well, that will bring us to our commercial break. Please come back to listen to us where we'll be discussing the film The Innocents by Jack Clayton. Our commercial break was brought to you by Amazon, and we'll have a film trailer, and we'll be back with you in a matter of minutes.
Amazon is here to make your life easier. By just the tap of a button, you can turn the camera on your phone to your own personal shopping list. Introducing Flow. Just tap the camera icon onto the search bar, and you can find whatever it is you're looking for, right on Amazon. Faster than scanning a barcode and typing the name of your item into the search engine. Besides, searching with words is so 2012. Save time and money. Amazon, where shopping meets effortless.
There has never been a ghost story created especially for the adult moviegoer until The Innocents. Do they ever return to possess the living? 20th Century Fox, which presented Deborah Kerr in Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, and such outstanding motion picture immortals as Snake Pit, Gentleman's Agreement, and Peyton Place, now gives you The Innocents. Based on the Henry James chiller of macabre evil. Brilliantly adapted for the screen by William Archibald and Truman Capote. Do they ever return to possess the living?
You can see. You must.
I hate you.
The Innocents, produced and directed by Jack Clayton, the man who directed Room at the Top, turned into fearful reality by the magnificent performance of Miss Deborah Kerr, with Michael Redgrave as the uncle, co-starring Peter Wingard, Megs Jenkins.
I saw him staring. Who, miss? The same man, the man on the tower. The tower? But now, just now, he was staring past me into the house as if he were hunting someone. Oh, what's he like, miss? Oh, he had dark, curling hair and the hardest, the coldest eyes. Is he... Would you say he was very handsome? Oh, yes, handsome and obscene.
Do they ever return to possess the living?
And when did you first see and hear of such things?
Why, I made them up.
Shall I tell you who taught them to you? I won't ever again, I promise. Shall I tell you who taught you? The things you've done, the things you've said? Shall I tell you his name?
Perhaps the most controversial concept in human relationships ever presented on the screen. With one of the world's great stars, from the man who directed Room at the Top. A new and adult motion picture experience. Do they ever return to possess the living?
Welcome back. Thank you for listening to our commercial break. First of all, before we get started, our opening credits were done by Ashley Serena, and we will be featuring her playlist, which is on Spotify. She's a new recording artist, starting to make a bit of waves in the recording industry. Fantastic voice, and she did our special tradition song, which is "Oh Willow Wally." And her cut is available on Spotify and iTunes, and we will actually have those on our website, which will be posted before this show is aired. So actually, by the time you listen to this, it'll be up on our website. So now that we're back, we're going to be discussing The Innocents. I have to say that Kewin wasn't the smoothest in the world, but what can you do? And we're going to be... We're now to the lights, camera, action segment of our show, which will be discussing the film, The Innocents, directed by Jack Clayton, starring Deborah Kerr. So, John, would you like to start out the discussion about The Innocents?
Yes. So it's funny because I did, as I mentioned earlier, I did prefer the movie versus the book. There's just definitely something that right off the bat, you kind of knew something was wrong and something was going wrong. I think there was that through the book, the narration of the book, it was like very acquiescence versus the movie just very quickly moves you into this scene where she, the governess is interviewing for the job, and she gets the job, and then she goes there and she's walked through this amazing mansion, and she's just in awe of everything. And then she meets these beautiful kids, but like right away, I think the maid says to her, "Oh yeah, the last governess died." So that right there was a huge difference in contrast and change from the book, because it was as if she in the book had to get that pulled out and like how she died and why. So that was very, I guess, Hollywood in a way to sort of invoke that sense of suspicion and supernatural mystery and the lure. So I definitely loved that it gets right to the point, obviously, to sort of what the story is, but still leaves room for a lot of ambiguity as to what really is going on. So, yeah, but I love it. Love it.
And what about yourself, Victoria?
Well, I kind of have to agree with John. I like the movie a whole lot more than the book. I love the book, but the movie was definitely more enthralling, drew you in quite a bit more, as movies do. And they were talking about, during how to make the movie as ambiguous as James was in his novel, which I thought they did a good job with that. It had all the elements of the book, but it had the entertainment value of it, which captivated you more as an audience would need to have. So yeah, I give it a big thumbs up. I enjoyed it a lot, and also because when I was younger, I remembered watching Monster Movie Matinee with my mom back in the day. And I didn't really realize the movie was the movie until I saw Miss Jessel in the pond across the lake. And then I remembered, oh my God, that scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, revisiting the movie.
I think the film works on a lot of levels. I think what's quite interesting is that the film's actually based on the play of Turn of the Screw, which was written by William Archibald. And then Jack Clayton, when he was doing it, came in and goes, well, he liked the play, but he wanted something a bit better. And that's when he hired Truman Capote to come in and write the screenplay for The Innocents. And The Innocent, what I found quite interesting, I was watching the making of documentary, and Truman Capote stayed on the set the whole time, and he would actually write extra dialogue for the children whilst they were filming. And they would go, and Jack Clayton was one of these directors. And apparently he would survive like on very little sleep, but every day they would film everything, and all night long he would watch the rushes. And then when he came in, he knew exactly what needed to be done. So they never had to do like extra scenes or something like that. He would just set everything up, and Truman Capote would help through that. And I have to sit there and say they'd taken a Victorian, what could have been a stuffy Victorian film genre, and turned it into a more of a Southern Gothic film genre, which Truman Capote is very, very good at, in Cold Blood, for instance, or anything else you've seen him write and stuff like this. And I think that transforming it from Victorian to like a Southern Gothic set in Victorian times, I think really works for the film. So, but I love this film. It works on so many different levels and so many different shades, and I think another thing that works better in the film than it does on the book is that you also get, when the governess, who's now 40 years old, played by Deborah Kerr, I think having the bigger the age difference also sets things up a bit better for her piousness and everything that we spoke about the book. I think it becomes a lot more clear in the film that's not so clear in the book. Instead of a 20-year-old spinster, now you got a 40-year-old spinster.
Yeah, especially that very famous scene, the kissing scene.
Yeah.
Of that age.
That was a little risky. I know, it's like gross. But that was pretty risque for 1961.
Yeah.
Well, the film when it first came out had an X rating when it first came out because of the kissing scene in it. Yeah. So, which I found quite interesting in its own right. I mean, nowadays you'd be like, yeah, that's Game of Thrones.
Brothers and sisters, uncles and cousins,
Yeah. So, boy, how far we've come. I mean, I think the film also works. I mean, it really sets the tone from the very beginning of it. I mean, you get this black screen with just bird sounds, and then it goes into the "Oh Willa Wally" song, and then you have Deborah Kerr on the left hand of the screen, basically in very, very cleared, and then black all around her, and then it goes into the story, and then it has that wraparound where it's heard from back in the beginning of the film, and I think it really sets you up, and it's like, and I like the idea that at the beginning of the film everything's really stark and clean and bright, and then as the story goes on, the sides start getting darker and darker.
Yeah.
Well, the whole movie deteriorates, though. You go from all the beautiful roses and everything. Well, you have the roses falling and deteriorating, which shows decay already in the making in the beginning of the film. But if you notice, she's wearing darker and more drab dresses and whatnot. I think, turning into Miss Jessel, basically, almost towards the end of the film.
Yeah.
Because she becomes dark and unnatural as the movie is dark and unnatural. So.
And I like before anything ever happened, like when she first sees the figure at the top of the tower, it's like sound just goes off. There's no sound.
It's weird because I thought that was like, I thought it was my phone. I mean, watching it, I thought it was that, and it was like, oh wait, and then I was like, no, it was a mechanism used to kind of create that stillness,
And I thought another interesting thing which actually plays through is actually with going part of the making. The two children would only get their dialogue. They didn't get the whole script. They would just get their scenes. So they didn't know what was going on in any of the scenes. And I think that the kids did a fantastic job. Pamela Franklin is Flora, which we will be discussing her later in our season for Hell House, The Legend of Hell House, which we'll be covering, I think, June time. But she stars in that. So this was her first movie role in this. And I'd say the two kids themselves were fantastic. I mean, they really played the parts extremely well.
Yeah, especially the little boy. Like, again, Miles in the book is such a big character in a way, and so the little boy in this, like, definitely, like, I think the girl annoyed me. I'm not gonna lie. Laura, like, especially
the screaming bit.
Oh my God! Just shut her up. Throw her in the lake. I mean, man, just throw her in. Like, like, shut her up.
Miles was a little turd too, though.
Yeah. He was just nasty. He was just like, oh, really?
Well, I mean, the thing is I think I mean, I've, going back to their backgrounds and stuff like that. So I guess they probably would be quite mature for their age, though, if it's only the two of them. And I said before, there's no other children around them.
Yeah.
And, they're all terribly well spoken, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
When he kept calling her dear.
I know.
I was like, how rude.
How mature for a 10-year-old boy, to be calling everybody dear. And,
dear.
It was like how he extended his hand,
Yeah.
to her. And, just the gestures even. He was turning into, Quint.
Well, I mean, every time that, and it's kind of funny because even though she thought it was evil sort of thing, I mean, the thing is, I think the children knew, because the thing is, what children is they find something that gets on your nerves or that unsettles you, they'll keep doing it.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And I think, and that's where, and because, she's a 40-year-old person, I mean, from the book, I mean, from 20 to 40, and she's still living at home with her parents, and this is her first job. And I mean, and in Victorian times, I mean, she's well past her sell-by date. I mean, she's well past
Shelf life.
There won't be anyone getting underneath those petticoats in a long time. But,
I think in this, I don't know if they stipulated that she was, and she's been a governess, and because of her age, she's had to have done it more than once. So I feel like that's a big difference from the book versus the movie, is that she's a seasoned governess.
Is she a seasoned governess? Because
I mean, of her age, she has to.
This is her first job. Because he says to her at the beginning of it, she goes, I'm, you're going to hire me. I'm not experienced. I've done this first time. She says that in the beginning.
What the hell she been doing then? Well, I mean, I guess she could have done something else, and this is her first time being a governess to children. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from the way the film plays out, I'm suggesting this is probably her first time around children, really. I mean, she might have taught Sunday school. I mean, because she didn't have that Sunday school kind of thing about it, like, where you don't, but then again, you only spend an hour with a child once a day, once a week, and then they go off, and, all kids behave themselves during Sunday school normally. It's very rare that you get a.
Well, didn't they say the vicarage she had, it was like a 2-room house that she came from, and it wasn't so big and grand, and that she had family, so she probably had a lot of siblings. So,
she had a sister, because she gets a letter from the sister, and
that's right.
And then, I mean, she never reads the letter from the sister because Flora takes the letter off her and then goes, and she opens up the letter and goes, "Oh, who's this?" It goes, "Oh, it's a picture of my family. Am I in it?"
She's like, "No, you see."
But yeah, I mean, I think the film does play a lot better than the book. I mean, there's so many little hidden gems in it. And the thing is like, and I said before, you also get the reactions that you don't get in the book, per se. I mean, there's things like, when she's seeing someone else, everyone's like, "What the hell are you looking at?" And she's like, "Didn't you see it?" No one else is seeing it, but obviously she's seeing it.
Yeah.
And especially the way they bring Quint out, like when he slowly comes towards the window and then slowly
right
away. And
that was creepy too. I have to say they did a good job, because even though I knew that was coming because of the book, I was still like, "Ooh," and I felt it feels unsettling because he's not like directly looking at her, and as she explains, it's as if he's looking into the house, looking for something. Yeah, so I thought that was like really well played.
That still made me jump. It still made me jump.
Mm-hmm. And I think that you also have a lot of things in there as well that you don't have in the book. I mean, the housekeeper, she's like, she's giving her a lot more information than you get in the book, sort of thing.
Yeah.
As far as, now Miss Jessel and Quint's relationship is pretty volatile. I mean, apparently that he hits her and beats her.
Yeah.
But she's still madly in love with him, sort of thing. I mean, it's basically Jerry Springer all over again. But
right.
But and then it's like, and then when he dies, and the thing is, and this is where you don't get in the book, it's like, did Miss Jessel murder Quint? Because he hit, and he's like, and she goes, the look on his face was a look of surprise.
Yeah.
And then you got Miss Jessel's then she goes into this deep mourning sort of thing, and
she kills herself, right? Which is, again, was in the book. It wasn't. They didn't know. The maid said she didn't know what happened to her. That she just didn't come back and she died. So in this, she literally drowned herself, or she drowned herself in the lake.
Yeah, and well, I mean, the thing is, in the book, didn't they find one of their bodies on the road somewhere?
That was Quentin. So it was different too. He didn't fall in front. He fell down the road in like a gutter, basically, and he died.
He was drunk or something. But in the movie, he fell down those stairs in the garden, I believe.
Yeah.
And, well, another thing is, Miles finds Quint's body.
Yeah.
So we know that happened. And the thing is, this all happened like in less than a year before the governor gets there. And then you have...
Which you also can insinuate that is he like a bad seed, that he did he do something to him? Like, you don't want to think that, but you're kind of like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Miles, I mean, did you see him? Wouldn't you think of that?
Oh yeah, I definitely, especially how he held himself, which is again you don't see it as much in the book, but the way he holds himself is like the little man of the house. Like he holds his hands in his cuff, and let's have a talk, dear. No, I'm good.
Jello.
I'm good.
What was that? When he was reaches over, he slaps the Jello.
Yeah. Well, he's very violent, because even that scene, which I don't remember in the book, when she goes to go play hide and seek with them,
right?
And she sees her, and then it's like this weird like thing, and then he comes out from the little cabinet, he like puts her in a chokehold. I'm like, what the fuck?
You're hurting me.
And she's like, you're hurting me. I'm like, well, hurt him back. Like, what's wrong with you?
She's a lot bigger than him. I would have kind of like beat his ass at that
I would have tossed him over me and like, whoops.
I mean, another thing is, I wonder if Flora found Miss Jessel's body, because I mean, they say that they make a big point about Flora was always around Miss Jessel and Quint was always around Miles, and they also think that whether the children saw them having sex, because the housekeeper saw them having sex.
Yeah,
apparently.
Clearly.
Well, and she also loved going to that little gazebo thing by the lake, and so that is like, did she go out there? Did she go out there with her, and then she turned around and she was in the lake dead, like and that was her last sort of. Because it seems like in the movie she's also dancing, and she's like, this is where I have to say, I have to believe that she does see her, because she's dancing and she's looking at something. So it is, the movie is a little bit clearer, like to me, that they are seeing something, because it's as if she's dancing and she's looking off like, oh, look at me, look at what I'm doing, I'm dancing.
Either that or they're just all mad.
Yeah, could be.
It's dysfunctional.
Watching it this time around, I thought of it more simple fact, like when she goes, Miles is coming home, and then Miles comes home. And first of all, we don't know how long Miles has been at boarding school, first of all. And I'm kind of wondering if maybe, I don't know if he'd been writing her letters. There's so much not being said that as far as their relationship goes between Miles and Flora. But I imagine that Miles, if he's been segregated from all of kids and stuff like this, and he's living alone in the manor house, he's going to do anything he can to get back there, because he's the lord of the manor, where if he's done school, he's going to be one of many. And it's like that only child syndrome. Like if you're an only child, you're so used to the world being focused on you that when you get out in the real world, it becomes quite difficult for them. And I think that that's so it does play around with those. Do they have supernatural powers, or is the spirit world eating Flora, letting know that Miles is on his way home, or do they have all this stuff planned to begin with?
They never really come right out and quite say what he did at school, except that it was some kind of abomination at some point,
Yeah, and it was like he said something to someone, and someone said what he said, and it freaked them out, and they said, "Oh, we got to get rid." And it never says what he said. It could be deferred to that, oh, if you don't like someone, just kill them, and he tells another kid that, the headmaster is going to be like, send his ass home. He's telling kids to kill other kids. No, get rid of him.
Well, I mean, the thing is, if they did see Miss Jessel and Quint having sex, he might have been talking about having a sex conversation. Oh,
that's true.
Well, that's what it alluded to in some of the things that I had read about the movie, that they were even saying it could have been some kind of weird taboo homosexual thing going on at the school too. That was brought up into several essays.
Yeah.
So, but that was more or less in the book and the movie. But like I said, it wasn't clearly definitive as to exactly what he had done wrong, only that it was pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I mean, if we discuss the film, let's look at the film for that. Let's say that it's not in the governess's head. That sits there and say that everything that she sees is real. Then what you have is, that's what I like about this film. You can see it in two ways. If you look at it like everything is real, and the governess isn't going mad, and you have like one film. But then if you rewatch the film and say that now let's watch the film as the governess is going mad, then you have a totally different film. So I think the film works on so many different levels.
True.
The book, you kind of read it one way. I think there's some ambiguity within the book, but I think it's better played within the film setting.
Agreed.
Same thing with The Haunting, because we, like Keith, you had mentioned, it's like a perfect bookend that when we covered that, Eleanor, was it her descent into madness, or was there something supernatural about her that was invoking these things? Because you could also look at it from the angle of no one else is seeing these ghosts, but maybe it's because she's attuned to that. Maybe she's attuned to these spirits and it's driving her crazy. This is her first experience where she's been around spirits that are haunting her. And they do the same sort of thing within The Haunting that they do in this movie, which is this sort of weird vertigo that she gets. And it's played out where she's like carrying the candlestick and she's walking around. It's this loud music where she's just spinning around and it's like she's descending into madness. But if you think about it, as kids, when I witness something supernatural, it changes your perception of the world. And it is a little, you feel like you've lost your balance. You don't know what's going on and you don't know how to comprehend reality, and you almost have to be shooken to be like, okay, you're back,
Precisely. Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, I mean, taking The Haunting in effect, I mean, the stories do have a similarity where you have a middle-aged woman breaking away from the family for the very first time and going to a big house in a big setting, going from in The Haunting, it's from going from suburbia to this great big mansion house. In this case, a small Parson village to a big mansion house. And then, it's quite, there's a lot of similarities in it. Even the way that both films are filmed, there's a lot of similarities there where, which I think that work very well together. It'd be like, if I was going to own a cinema, I probably would do like a double feature.
Yeah. Because things manifest around her too, because like even when she goes to the school to pick them up, I think, or is a church, she goes to a church and then she hears the woman crying, and she goes in the room where the class is, and she's at the head of the class and she's crying, and then the maid comes in and she turns around and she's gone. So it's like that, those constant things where she's seeing things and no one else is seeing anything, and
there was the teardrops on the desk though.
Yeah.
So, I mean, was she crazy? Was she crying?
But she could have been crying too, though. So that's the interesting thing is, like, as you said, earlier, that as she throughout the movie becomes a little from light to dark, like the scene where she comes up on Flora, she's wearing that black dress, and I thought, isn't it interesting the juxtaposition between her and what's her name, the one that died,
Miss Jessel.
Miss Jessel, that it's almost as if she's so far away you can't see who she really is. But what if that's her? Like it's like a mirroring of her, who she is now.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Well, I think another thing that you can take into effect with this also is that if you take someone who's over pious, and it doesn't matter. I mean, even in today's society, if you have someone who's over pious, as we were saying before, whether you're far left or far right or whatever like this, and you sit there and you go to one belief system or whatever it may be, and you start digging into and looking at things in that one particular position, but don't look at anything else around it.
Yeah.
Then what happens is you become quite clouded about the reality of the situation, and you're just so focused on one way of thinking that it does cloud what the reality of the situation is. And I do think that though, she sees these things and stuff like that, but by that time her mind's pretty much geared in one direction. This is what's happening. She's made up her mind, and she's going to make sure that everyone sees things her way, because there's no other way of seeing things.
Mm-hmm. And well, it's also I feel like in the movie it is her suffering through this, and that she's suffering alone. She, in the beginning, she has questions, and then when she starts to see that things happen, at first she's a little protective because she doesn't know what she's actually seeing. Then it becomes just an annoyance and a nuisance. Like, don't you see it? What do you mean? No, look. And she's literally like turning people to look, and it's like her way of like, you have to be able to see this because I can't deal with this. I'm not like, I'm losing my mind,
And I think that, she's also not very caring. I mean, she comes across as being very, very caring. It's like, oh, the children, very, very caring. But I noticed this time, and this probably, I mean, I've seen this movie quite a few times, and this is probably the first time I noticed this. But when Miles goes to bed for the very first time and she's tucking him in, and Miles is crying, and it's like, she goes, my uncle doesn't care about me. He doesn't, no one cares about us. And he has this like scene that's quite sad. And she's just like, just doesn't matter to her. And I found that quite strange for someone who's very caring about loving the children and giving love to children. And here's a boy that's, he knows what's going on. He knows that no one loves him. He knows that these two kids are basically thrown into this manor house and they're forgotten about. Yeah. Pretty much it. The father, the uncle is going to spend their money or whatever he's doing. And I thought, what's quite interesting is that at Victorian times, if you want to have sex and have like careless open sex, you went to Calcutta. And that's where he was when their parents died, because I was in Calcutta.
Yeah.
And
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And, and the kids were going to, basically, put a kink in his tail if they were anywhere near him. So he stays in London so he can do whatever the hell he wants and live his bohemian lifestyle, with the rich and famous. And he's squirreled these kids away. And these kids are squirreled away. And the thing is we're not quite sure how Flora looks at the situation, but we know how Miles feels about the situation.
Yeah.
And I think that any normal person that we put in that situation would have actually had a bit more understanding for Miles. But when Miles says everything and he's crying and she just like, she wipes the tear off him and is like, chin chin, up with your chin, any day. And I think that most people in that situation, which I think is very telling for the governors, would actually probably give him a cuddle and goes, don't worry, we're here, I'm here for you if you need anything, be a lot more caring and more sympathetic and understand that situation.
But she's also steeped in suspicion by that point, because it's like not what you say but how you say it. And Miles had the habit of saying, like, come on, he went to bed with a dead bird. Like, you don't think something's wrong with that? Like, I think she's kind of like, I want to comfort you, but she wants to comfort him and maybe Flora, but she's afraid that if she comforts him, she's acknowledging that it's okay to be that way or act that way. So I think there's a part of her that is like, not like the nanny, not the maid that is, oh, come here, my little man of the house, and hug you. Oh, I'm going to hug you. And he just killed a bird. Like, there's not, or he just found a dead bird and he's holding it. Don't do that.
Well, she alluded to it looks like it's, he said it looks broke, so she probably clearly thinks he snapped the bird's neck.
Well, wouldn't you? He's like sitting there calling you like, hey, look at my little birdie here. It's asleep. No, it's dead.
He's keeping it warm. He was keeping it warm.
Yeah. But I also think, she does have a one-track mind. Before, you have the bird situation. She's still hung up on whether there's a man in the tower or not. It could have been Miles looking down on her. The sun was in her eyes, and it was just a shadow, and sort of.
But where he's standing, he's so short. There's no way he goes past the spire. So it wasn't.
He could have been standing on something for all we know. You don't know. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't really quite sure.
And I forgot he was actually playing with the bird, so now I'm a little bit more suspicious about that.
Well, he said he was up there for 20 or 30 minutes when she asked him.
Yeah.
So, he didn't see anybody. Clearly at that point, he probably didn't. She might have just been going off the bend at that point, too.
Yeah. And when Miles is going on and on about, no one loving him and stuff like this, she was so focused on finding out why he was sent home from school. That was her focus point.
Yeah, her mission, yeah.
And because she didn't find out anything, she kept thinking the worse and worse. And I think some people are like that. If they don't have the answers, they think of the worst. And sometimes by the time you think of the worst, the real reason is probably really nothing. It could be really something real.
Probably so. Yeah. Probably just a mischievous little boy, maybe,
Yeah. Or a boy acting out through his emotions of being neglected, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that... and Miles is very, very well brought up. But, I do think that when you have, I said before, if you got children who are not around, I see it with friends of mine's children who are not around other kids hardly at all. They're only around their parents, and they're terribly mature in a lot of ways. And they speak very maturely and stuff like this. And I think that Miles and Flora are going to have that going on with them because they're going to be a bit more mature because all they do is speak to adults. That's all they speak to adults. And, the housekeeper speaks to them. Now, the thing is, the housekeeper is going to act the way she does before them, because at the end of the day, they employ her. Everyone around those kids are employed by them, really.
And I hate to say it too, they're getting more education than the maid is, because the maid is like, her educational peak is done, right? And now it's all servitude, and so I think what is she going to say no? Because she is going to feel like, well, I don't know, maybe you're right, maybe so she's going to trust these kids because they're getting more education than her, unfortunately.
Well, another thing is that they're going to rule the roost. Whatever they say is going to go. You're not going to really, in effect, you're not going to really reprimand them for much because they're paying your paycheck. It's a bit like Michael Jackson with his faceless. At the end of the day, everyone around him is on his paycheck, so they're almost going to go, Michael, you've gone a bit too far. You're fired. You're out of job. If you got everyone around you pretty much on your payroll.
They're like, you want me to drive you to the hospital? Get the.
Get that looked at.
But it's like, so anyone reprimanding them, even if it's Miss Jessel and Quint, Quint's not going to be too horrible on him. Quint, and previously it says in the film, which he was the valet for the uncle. Now I don't know why he didn't take him along with him for whatever reason. He left Quint in charge of everything.
I think that the uncle was fine with if something happened or something went wrong, he was fine with that, because ultimately I think it's just an understatement, I think, of during that time, that if you were an executor to any children, if something happened, you would get the money. Like it's like it's their money, but until they come of age, then you have to take care of it for them. So he was fine if either of those kids died or both of them. I'm sure he'd have been like, put him in a box, bury him in the backyard, and we'll call it a day. He just didn't care. I
don't think he cared either. He was pretty cold and insensitive. Who gives a governess that kind of, power over a household, especially not uneducated, or she doesn't have experience.
No experience.
And it's like, hey, do what you want, make up your mind. These are all your decisions. I don't want to be bothered with it. So clearly, something happens to either child, he's not going to care. He's just going to get more money out of the deal. He doesn't want to be bothered.
Well, another thing, if, at the end of the film, spoiler alert, like we'd said before, but Miles dies. And the thing is, that money probably wouldn't go to Flora anyway.
No.
Women at that time didn't get inheritances, did they?
Yeah, no.
Not really.
So for him, he's probably thinking win-win situation. Yay!
Yeah.
I'm going to go buy me another hooker. Yay!
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Florida's
it's like, we just want to let you know he died. I told you, don't disturb me.
Well, see, Flora goes insane and Miles buys the farm, so there you go.
The one part I thought was interesting is that the line, because this does resonate from the book and the movie, is that she was an old woman. So I don't know how old the governess was, because they kept making that she's like she's becoming an old woman, and they make that reference like as if she's like decrepit, and like, so when she's becoming possessed, or she thinks she's becoming possessed, they mention that this is what's happening and how it's transforming her. Now I think if she's being transformed or possessed by her, she would be more rebellious or more whatever. It's not but
when you got kids at the age of 10 and 8 and they're discussing old can be 20.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I remember,
but it's a governance.
God, they're really old, and then it's like you leave school and you realize that there's only like 20 years difference between you and them. You're like, oh, what?
No, but it's the governess that's saying she's old. Look at her. She looks like she's telling the maid, "Look at her. Look at her. Don't you see it? She's old now. She's old." I think the maid acknowledges it. I have to take her away. You're right. I have to take her away. She seems old now.
Oh, okay. When she's talking about Flora.
Yeah. It's weird. So I didn't really get why that was.
Well, I also found a bit interesting is that Flora and Miles is like whatever the governess thinks is going on with them. She discusses some of it in front of them,
right?
And so, and I think the kids twig exactly what kind of person she is. Anyway, I think Flora twigs at the begin with, and because it says like Miles, when she gets the letter and goes, Miles is coming home, and then Flora goes, look at this spider eating a butterfly.
And you're like, I know. That was weird. She's like, okay, creepy girl.
Well, I think right then and there, I think the cast is set. And I'm sure that, when her and Miles goes, this woman we can have a bit of fun with. She's going to be
Probably.
Yeah, because she often catches them like whispering to each other and what's going on? Nothing when they're not doing anything.
And I said
they're
before,
like being in grade school and getting a substitute teacher,
Yeah.
They were going to break this person over the coals.
And it's what kids do. The thing is, it's not so much as that they hated her or anything like that, but you push when anyone new comes into your life when you're a child, and even when they're an adult, if I get a new boss, I do the same thing. You see how far you can push that line.
Any relationship, you're like, let's push this.
Yeah, let's see how far you can push it. And then once you realize how far you pushed it, you don't push it any further. And the kids are like that. And the thing is, and it becomes very, very telling by the end of the film that they know exactly what's going on. They know exactly. He says to her, goes, you mad old, woman, you hussy, and all this other stuff to her.
Right.
And to be honest, he's called her out on it.
Yeah. But also you could say if he is possessed, it's almost like tongues, right? Speaking in tongues, because he goes from being like very dapper to being like, yeah, hussy, get away from me, you whore. Like, what is going on here?
I know. If I start laughing, we start calling her hussy. It's like, oh, hey.
Hussy. But see, I looked at that one scene, the simple fact that I think they knew that something was going on, and they probably him and Flora probably had conversations and go, I think she's going a bit mad. And they're probably, oh, no. And then I think that once it came across that she is gone mad, I think that's why he's like, oh my God. And I think that's him freaking out about it.
Mm-hmm.
And because
he's like, oh God, we pushed her too far.
Basically.
Yeah. And I would think to the simple fact that, when he ran away, is like, get the hell away from me. You know what I mean? And I think I would, in the same situation, if someone's gone mad like that in front of me and all of a sudden like, I'm possessed, it's like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
And then she's like, and then, she's just, she's basically on that one track mind sort of thing. She's hit that track and she's not going to come off that track, no matter what happens.
Mm-hmm.
She did seem to come unglued, the kids, in the scripting though, like you could take it both ways, but it does seem like the kids are like, okay, what's your deal? What the hell is wrong with you? You're saying you're being, they probably did push her off the crazy train at that point. That is a really realistic way of looking at it.
And he died the same place where Quentin died. So it's a weird sort of, that's where it kind of comes full, like circle that way. It's like he dies in the same spot. So again, there's just so many, to me, I love that one thing I do like about this movie is it makes me ask so many questions because I'm like, so what, again, how did he really die? Like all these things, it makes me wonder, was it an accident? Did he die that way? Or did the boy do it? And was it like sort of redemption? Like she kills him like the way he killed him, it just makes me ask a lot of questions.
Which is quite interesting because Michael Winner has done a prequel to this film called The Newcomers that deals with before the government shows up and deals with the Jessel and Quint storyline. So I've never seen it.
Parents
I'm gonna like seek it out now and just see. It might be total crap, but
no. And I'm curious because I wonder if the parents are still around at that point. Mm. So you get to see the relationship of the parents, and then because again, we don't know how the parents died either, right?
No.
So
they don't say, it's not specified.
So it's a very ominous thing where, like the difference between this and The Haunting is that like that there were clear mentions that the mishappenings were, a lot of them were accidents or things that happened. So there's no clear point. They reference what happens, but it sort of wasn't just an accident type of thing versus this. It's like, there's literally nothing, they died. That one commits suicide and the other one falls and there's an accident, but it's sort of, that could also still be ambiguous, right? Like, did they die that way? They assume they die that way. And the maid again, I think knows more and she just doesn't want to scare the hell out of the governess. Like, she's just like, no, it didn't really happen. Do you know what happened? Well, they died. Wait, how did they die? Well, she kind of killed herself. Like she's kind of just not letting her get all the information.
Well,
but I also think that's like don't speak ill of the dead. That's a constant theme through here. Is like, I said before. It's like you die, you go from being an asshole to sainthood in one raise of a sword. And I think that that is like I don't want to speak ill of the dead. I found interesting with the book is that with the whole Miss Jessel, the way she died, I assumed that Miss Jessel died because she was pregnant. For some reason, I was thinking that she died because Quint died and she was pregnant.
No, but I think she went away, and she said, well, what happened? And she went away. And she goes, what do you mean she went away? And she kept trying to get her to say she died. She's like, I know she died, but I want her to say it. So she died. And then she's like, well, how? And then I think she sort of walked.
See, in those days, though, if you went away, it means that you were pregnant.
Exactly.
They sent you away. Oh, and that was all the way up until like the 1960s. You know, a person comes pregnant, and what happened to them? They went away. You know, they always went away.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's the reason why. I mean, I could be, you know, clutching at straws here for, you know, from the far west, you know, from the nether regions. But I think that it has, you know, I just thought it was like she probably was pregnant. I don't know why, because, you know, but that's the impression I got here. She commits suicide, but, you know, it just seems to be more about grief or guilt.
Yeah.
But she did say that, you know, Mrs. Gross did say several times she went away. And like John was saying, she wasn't going to stop, you know, banging on this poor old maid till she said that this bitch was dead.
Yeah, dead. And then she did it with all of them. She did it with the kids. Like, what do you mean? And then, you know, you get in the book, like, her internal battle. You don't get that with the movie, but it's like she just would not give up. Like, she's like, I'm going to get the answers until, you know, I'm going to get whatever I need. But like, to Keith's point, too, there's no gray area for her. It was either black or white, and she was picking, you know, she wanted that specific thing, and she would just go for it. And it was, you know, it'd be the answers that she wanted, though. She already had a predestination what these answers are, and she wanted people to answer the answers that she wanted answered to her specifications. Yeah,
her forced reality at this point.
And that she saw everything as good, but the moment it was tainted, and there was, you know, I have to save it, or I have to fix it, you know, and make it better again. It's crazy.
Boy, she was really good at that, wasn't she?
Yeah.
She did a great job.
Yeah.
I mean, when Miles kisses her, I mean, I look at the same thing with Miles and Flora. I don't know why I think of it this way, but I always think of them just keep pushing the envelope. And I thought that he's like, you know, at that time, I think that, you know, and Miles is quite worldly. He knows about the world. He's been around for a 10-year-old. And I would think that he's like old spinster woman of 40 years old, who's probably never had a boyfriend, never been kissed, never left home. Let's kiss her and see what that does. And I'm for sure that's where she took it like something totally different. But what's very, very telling is that at the end of it, she kisses him on the lips when he's dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he's an adult almost, you know?
Yeah,
so it's like what the hell is this, you know?
You know, but like Maria and Tony at the end of West Side Story, it'll be after somewhere. It's like that.
Well, you know,
how many bullets in this gun, Gino? How many bullets?
Well, what I think about this too is like interesting is that what if because again, I still think she had such an infatuation with Quentin. Like, she was scared of him, but then she was intrigued and attracted to him. So what if that she was so close to getting the answers to who he was that, you know, he dies, and then it's like, did she lose him again? Like, you know, like, oh my God, like I lost, you know, and it just was like, I'm gonna, you know, she kissed him thinking, oh, it's him, you know, like, I just thought that too, because I thought
it kind of brings you back to the way he started screaming at her and calling her crazy old bitty hussy kind of thing. You know, there you go with that weird, you know, things that the voodoo that, you know, the things that you weren't supposed to do in that time, and there was all kinds of debauchery going on back then.
Yeah.
You know, and it was hinted around to, and I even think with her because, you know, clearly, you know, she was, you know, a spinster. There was a young boy around. You never know what was going through her brain, you know. But that was just too creepy when she did that at the end.
I did find interesting though that she didn't know what Quentin looked like until she found the picture of Quentin.
Picture in the attic.
And then she sees him, and then she's able to describe him. And going what you said as well, John, is like she found them quite sexually exciting. I mean,
yes.
You know, because even the description that she gives is like, you know, wild eyes, and it's like, well, people with wild eyes are not normally attractive. I'm sorry, it was like if one person's got one eye looking at you, the other eye looking for you, that's not sexy. It's just not.
No.
It's like it sounds like wild eyes.
It's just like, you know.
And then, you know.
Well, I mean, when he comes to the window, you know, I mean, I didn't find that attractive. I mean,
Look, I'm not going to lie. I think he was very attractive. So I would have been afraid. I would have been like, here, you want to open the window? Sure, come on in.
I thought he was kind of creepy looking. I don't know.
Look, and especially she hasn't seen a man in 40 years. So, you know, like,
well, that could be that too. You know, you'll take
like,
it.
you know, a creeper who's staring out my window. Because you can automatically infer that it could have been.
Clearly, he hasn't seen that movie, The Entity. Yeah.
It's like, not so bad getting raped by a ghost.
Oh my God! Ooh.
The best thing, at least they don't make you sleep in the wet spot afterwards.
And you know what's weird is you never really see the female ghost at all. Like it's always a distance or covered. Like she's like the lady in white or the lady in black. She's you don't see her. So that is a good point that she sees a picture of him and she clearly sees who he is now.
Well, that one, just with looking at her across, like I said, when I was little and I saw that where she just standing there like this, you know, not moving, not doing anything. It probably was a baseboard cutout or something that they put back there. But I mean, it just scared the crap out of me when I was a kid.
Yeah, and it's also that setting where it looks like she's coming out of the marsh. It's not like she's standing, like it looks like she's coming out of the water, which even makes it more like
creepy. I mean, it's disturbing, especially if you're 9, you know. Oh
my God. Yeah, I mean, those things, those types of images always stick with you, and
they do.
It's not like the very grotesque figures and stuff like that. It's those ominous, like in the background. Do you remember, like long time ago? Remember Three Men and a Baby or 3 Men?
Yeah.
So that whole ghost and then the kid and the cutout, and I remember that as a kid going like, yeah, that could be. And I mean, they kind of disproved it was like it was some promotional piece or something. Like at the time, that would freak you out. You know, you look at it, you're like, did I just see something that? Oh, you know.
Was probably the reason why the video sales went skyrocketed for that.
Everybody wanted to see it.
Yeah, I wanted to see the ghost.
It was quite brilliant, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah.
Well, somebody had to make that movie interesting.
What, you didn't find 3 men raising a baby like an inciting incident for you?
Well, I mean, if they were gay, it might have been better.
That would have been a whole other story there.
It was like
would have been more interesting. Period.
It's more like 3 has-been television actors making a movie.
Yeah.
You're right.
Trying to make a comeback.
3 down low men in the.
Well, they did a sequel.
Yeah.
And thank God that killed the franchise.
Thank God.
No kidding.
3 old gits raising a child again. Bring him back. We have to.
Can you imagine there was Flora? And no, you're evil, you're all evil.
I hate you. I hate you. She did kind of go off, didn't she?
Yeah, she just went from like 0 to 100 in like seconds.
Well, these kids, I mean, they had the most high-pitched screams I ever heard. Just like, Jesus.
Oh, it was like I had to actually, fast forward that a little bit because I was like, I couldn't take the sound.
It was rather obnoxious. It was just like,
well, I mean, they scream like children throwing a tantrum in a grocery store.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen my kids in the grocery store. I walked away from them. They do that spinny stuff, where they're, I want this, and it's just like that. I just walk away.
You're like, I don't know these kids. They're not mine. She pulled an uncle. They're not my kids.
Well, my sister Kelly, she's the middle child. Not sure what relevance that has, but she would throw these temper tantrums where she would throw herself down on the floor and then pull her hair out and just start screaming like ages.
Oh gosh.
I mean, one time I remember, like when I was a kid, I got on top of her. She's screaming and throwing a temper tantrum. And I started just slapping her across the face because I saw that happen. And was the one acting hysterical. And I was like slapping her and throwing water in her face, going, "Calm down! You're gonna get me in trouble."
I hope she hears this. I'd like to see her comments on that.
She's like, "I was Flora. You don't understand."
So Kelly, if you're listening to this, we want commentary.
Yes, please share your thoughts of the experience with Keith as a child, as a brother. Was he a Miles, basically?
Was he a Miles?
I kind of was like a small Miles, actually.
I knew it. I knew it.
I remember the teachers called my parents called my mother into school because I was bullying kids because I had I can't remember what it was, some toy. And I was going around to all the kids going, I got a new toy and you don't got one because you're poor and your mother's a prostitute and your father's an alcoholic. And I was like 5 years old in kindergarten.
What school were you going to back then?
I was going to Palermo Elementary School before my parents divorced.
Where were you?
Palermo in upstate New York. Yeah, it's just outside of Fulton at that time.
Okay, I was wondering if it was Wiley or Holy Family or something like that.
No.
Which would have made it a whole other experience with versus public.
Well, I remember, like, by the time I transferred to Sackett, I had a reputation of being quite precocious. So.
Oh, I believe that.
You know, I remember one time my teacher was yelling at me, and I go, "Excuse me," but I go, "Can you use a vocabulary that I can understand, please?"
Father coin.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
good times.
Well, I think it ran in the family actually because my nephew had to go down to school in first grade because they were learning vocabulary words, and one of the words was gay, and he wrote my name next to it. And they called my mom. They called my sister down to the school, and they're going,
so he learned how to spell. He
really
learned
can't mark him wrong for that.
He learned association. Good for him. Like, he learned it really young.
So
that's great.
Yeah. Man, my family's full of weirdos. But back to the Innocents. I think overall, I do think it works on so many levels, and I think it's, brilliant. I think what's interesting is that when the film was filmed, he didn't want to film it in CinemaScope. Jack Clayton didn't. And him and 20th Century Fox got in a huge fight about it. Neither one was going to budge. And they brought in the camera person. Can't remember his name now. And then he decided what you do is we'll color film the sides to give it that square look. And I thought, okay. And I have to say, because of that, I think it makes it really eerie, because what you have is, like, you have this brightness in the middle, and the sides are always quite dark.
Yeah.
They painted the lenses too sometimes. It said you painted the lenses. So, like, when she's going through, like, with the candles, they would that would just be totally, like, zeroed in on.
Mm-hmm.
The lighting was fascinating during the whole movie.
Well, they did all through candlelight, didn't they? They light all the scenes by candles. They use and they weren't using, like, very big Hollywood lights or anything like that. They would use candles.
Especially the scene when she goes into the room with Flora, and Flora is looking out the window or whatever, and she comes in. You could tell it's like they either used natural lighting outside, like the moon was out maybe, and it gave this like eerie glow.
It was really eerie. The whole thing was eerie. I mean, even in the beginning, the beginning was all, bright, beautiful gardens and everything, and it just kind of deteriorates.
Mm-hmm.
Just total deterioration. But the lighting was fantastic. In black and white, that even makes it more fantastic, because you don't see that anymore. Really, no. Not on that scope anyway.
Well, especially like in horror or ghost stories. I said before, that's why haunting is quite a good companion piece, because you don't really, back then it was all about the framing and the making the picture. And the director of photography, that's the guy saying, who came up with the idea. He goes, I'm a photographer. He goes, when I do a film, it's the photography of the film. Everything needs to look like, so you can take any scene and take one still out of it, and it should be a perfect photo.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you get back then. And nowadays you don't really get that. It's all about the overall look. Where I think back then it was all about, we want everything to look beautiful, and everything needs to look a certain way to help fit the piece.
I think it seems too fast now.
Yeah.
It's quick edit, isn't it?
Yes.
Which started with Beyond the Valley of Dolls, which we did last episode. So make sure you listen to that podcast.
Yes. And download it, please. Download all of our podcasts. Your collection.
Yes, they're all entertaining for sure.
Yeah, self promotion there. So, but yeah, I think nowadays what we do have, it is the quick edit, sort of thing. And I do think that, even in reality television, it's quick edit. You're kind of going, everything's very quick. And then people's attention spans are different nowadays as well. You can tell that, like, you watch a television program, commercial break, and then the first 2 minutes of it is a rehash of what you just saw 5 minutes earlier. It's like, what? Sort of thing.
Yeah.
Then another commercial break.
Mm-hmm.
Commercials are getting bigger and longer and whatever. It's just like, TiVo.
Yeah. I think with scenes, like within the movie too, you get these very strong wide angles of the whole scene. So you get a big picture of what the environment is like. So the house where they're kind of laying and playing and she's sitting, or when she goes out on the yard and she's walking around and she's, getting flowers and stuff, or when they're out there playing by the boats and all that stuff. So you get these really wide sweeping angles, but it helps you to focus in on them and then also explore what is lurking. So especially when there is something out, when you see the woman out and she's out in the water and stuff, your eyes look for that. Whereas now a lot of the scenes are really tight. They keep you tight into the scene because they want you to look at the dialogue. They want you to focus on what's the interaction between the characters. And it does a great job in keeping it wide because they want you to kind of let your eyes explore the scene, the full scene of what's going on. And
there's always an undertone of some element of evil behind every corner in this movie.
Yeah.
You know it's coming.
Yeah.
You don't really see it coming, but it was beautifully done. I mean, I really enjoyed watching this again. I mean, I really thought they did a fabulous job. The children, they were just creepy,
Well, Mark Stevens, who plays Miles, have you ever seen the movie Village of the Damned?
Yeah, he was in that.
He was the original of that as well, which I think might be covering next season 2. So make sure
that's worth revisiting too. He was really creepy in that too. That kid is just creepy. I wonder what he grew up to. I have to Google to see whatever happened to him.
He became an architect and he lives in Portugal.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
He quit the business shortly after. His parents sent him to boarding school because they wanted him to get better in his education, and that was pretty much it. So and Pamela Franklin went on to do a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But Flora was working up into the 70s, and then she decided once she got married, she decided she's not going to act anymore. So, but she had quite a.
She could have been on Dark Shadows easily.
Well, this storyline, it's funny that you say that. The Quentin storyline is taken from The Innocents or Turn of the Screw.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm a fan and I didn't even know that.
Yeah, when you have David and Denise Nickerson, I can't remember what her character is from Willy Wonka. In the Dark Shadows thing, that whole thing about her and seeing the ghost of Quentin and Quentin taking over their lives and then...
No kidding!
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It's a nod to Turn of the Screw.
Oh, wow, I did not know that. Interesting little factoid there for Dark Shadows fans.
Yes. And, this film's very influential. I mean, all the films came out because of this. The Changeling was influenced by Turn of the Screw as well and things like that. A lot of ghost stories come through. Yeah. Ringu, the original Japanese, the text that you hear, all those background noises, comes from the film The Innocents. They're playing them backwards and forwards and stuff like that.
Oh, interesting.
Really?
So this film had a lot of influence over modern horror, really, to...
to see most of the reviews, I mean, I went through a lot of the reviews, I mean, both old and new. And, I mean, other than how they marketed the movie, which was really like crap, what they did to it. But, I mean, every horror fan or even just any person's into gothic literature or anything, they say that this is one of the best movies that came out of England or even one of the best horror films ever made, actually.
Mm.
And, I mean, everybody agrees on it. Except for how they marketed it, it was like the 50-foot woman kind of marketing.
Oh, yeah.
It was terrible. It was
Can you
awful.
be haunted by a ghost?
Yeah.
Deborah Kerr stars in Innocence. Can you be haunted by a ghost? Yeah, sure. And she moves to her. Can you be haunted by a ghost?
I know, that was messed up shit, dude. Didn't really do it justice. It was really cheesy compared. I mean, it really was cheesy. That was. I mean, didn't really do Deborah Kerr or anybody else in that film any justice for what they did. And they said that was one of her best acting things ever, or her roles ever. She did one of her best jobs at that one movie.
Yeah.
Well, I think we were texting each other. I think that what happened was, I think the sequel to this is The King and I.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they got the skirt action going on, the bustle.
Yeah.
He's like, so I hear you're good with kids. Well, one kid.
That's okay. I got one of many. One goes missing, I won't know. And you can see I am. Shall we dance?
Hey, I liked that movie.
But I also think, Kate Bush is a big fan of this as well. And the song that we're using in our end credits is The Infant Kiss, which is actually a song about the innocence.
Yeah.
So,
which was really twisted because it just highlights that moment.
That's messed up.
It. Oh.
That is totally dysfunctional, but fascinatingly so. But it's dysfunctional.
And if Kate Bush, if you're listening to this, no disrespect, but I don't know where your mind's going. I'm scared.
But you're in good company.
Yeah, seriously.
So I guess that will bring us down to the natural conclusion of our podcast. So Vicki, overall, what are your final thoughts of taming the turning of the screw and the innocence?
The turning of the screw. It was an interesting piece of Victorian literature. Kind of keeps you in, does not wrap you around. The ending is kind of messed up, but it was a hauntingly well done story, as was the movie. I did like the movie better. It really delved into all the things that you probably could not have pulled out of the book, and it was done in such a way that it always kept you wondering: is this happening? Is this not happening? It's just one of those things you have to make your own mind up.
And what about yourself, John? How are your thoughts?
I again will reiterate, this is a rarity for me because usually I am more book versus movie, but I did prefer the movie more. I respect the novella and what it had to offer, but I definitely probably won't be reading it again anytime soon. I've moved on. The movie is definitely something that I will rewatch again because there are just nuances that, as Keith and I have said in the past about other movies, that as you watch it over and over again, you catch certain things that help you to sort of analyze it a little bit more, or maybe think of a different perception or go a different route of thought of the overall outcome. But yeah, I'm glad that Keith selected both of these.
And myself, I would sit there and say that if you're looking to get into Victorian fiction, I would say Turn of the Screw is probably the easiest way to break into it because it's short. But overall, I'm more of a fan of the book, The Innocents. I admired the book for the classicness, and if you're going to read Henry James, it's probably the easiest. I find some of his other work a bit hard going, but overall, The Innocents I can watch over and over and over again. Will I be reading The Turning of the Screw anytime soon? I'll never say never, but unless it's read to me on my deathbed, I can't see it being done anytime soon.
I think John concurs.
But I'm glad I read it. I'm glad that I actually got to experience it, and it's always quite good. From what John said in previous podcast, it's quite good to see the original source material and then see the film that's become of it, and being able to experience both. So, but I'm glad I did it, and The Innocents, I have the Blu-ray, I got the T-shirt, I got pretty much everything. So I will be reviewing watching the film over and over.
You got the dead dove.
Yes. I got the Miles doll.
He does. It's right behind him. I can see it.
So if you're a lonely spinster, woman who's looking for affection, come over. My Miles doll will kiss you.
He'd give you a lip lock you'll never forget.
No kidding. Now the people are going to run out there and want to watch that movie now.
I know.
God, I'm wondering.
And it was rated X when it first came out.
That's true, it was.
Unfortunately, it's probably going to be rated G today. But well, that brings us to the end of the Literary License podcast. We'd like to thank Vicki, our marketing manager, for joining us. And you can find us on our social media, which is we're available on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and we always go by the name LL Podcast. If you're looking for us on the web, you can find us at www.llpodcast.com, and you can find our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Podbean. So this is Keith Shago saying goodbye.
And this is John Wilson saying goodbye.
And this is Vicki saying goodbye.
Thanks for joining us. And next month, we'll be covering the Amityville Horror with special guest Matthew Brockmeyer, who's just won a couple awards for his novel of last year, which is brilliant. I'll give you links to his book. I can't pronounce the name of it, so I'm not going to pronounce it because I'll do it in the service.
You're going to mangle it?
but he will be with us. And then we're also doing The Strangers. I'd also like to give a big thank you to Ashley Serena for doing that fantastic rendition of Oh Willow Wiley for our podcast. We're internally thankful for you, and you can find her playlist on Spotify and iTunes, and her playlist will also be on our website. So good night.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
And when did you first see and hear of such things?
Why, I made them up.
Who taught them to you?
I told you, they just came into my head.
What were they? Shall I tell you who taught them to you?
I won't ever again, I promise.
Shall I tell you who taught you? The things you've done, the things you've said? Shall I tell you his name?
You don't fool me. I know why you keep on and on. It's because you're afraid. You're afraid you might be mad. So you keep on and on, trying to make me admit something that isn't true. Trying to frighten me the way you frightened Flora. But I'm not Flora. I'm no baby. You think you can run to my uncle with a lot of lies. But he won't believe you. Not when I tell him what you are. A damned hussy. A damned dirty-minded hag. You never fool us. We always knew.
They took him in tight, but things are not right. What is this infant kiss that sends my body tingling? I've never fallen for a little boy before. No control, just a kid and just in school. But only call me Georgie. His little hand is on my heart. He's got me where it hurts me. Knock, knock, who's there in this baby? You know how to work me. All my barriers are going. It's starting to show. Let's go, let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go. I cannot sit and let something happen I regret. Ooh, he scares me. There's a man behind those eyes. I catch him when I'm bending. Ooh, how he frightens me when they whisper privately. Couldn't lady blows me words of caress on their lips that speak of and of love. I want to smack, but I hold back. I only want to touch. And I will stay and find a way to stop this war against too much. All my barriers are going. It's starting to show.